upon the arrival of the newborn, cradled securely in their mother's loving embrace. The young girl, Louise, with a stern expression declared, "He's not my brother." Initially, her parents, Natalie and Pierre, brushed off her statement as a simple bout of sibling jealousy. Yet, after witnessing a string of unusual events surrounding the baby, they decided to address Louise's concerns by arranging a DNA test. The results of this test brought to light a shocking revelation. Stay tuned to discover the surprising twist in this family's narrative. And don't forget to hit the like button, share, and subscribe for more enthralling stories. Natalie and Pierre, a couple residing in a quaint Parisian suburb, were often admired by many for their seemingly idyllic life. Their wedding, held under a clear blue sky and attended by a close-knit group of family and friends, was reminiscent of a scene straight out of a romantic novel. They lived in perfect harmony, blending love and partnership seamlessly, while weekdays were dedicated to their respective careers. Weekends were reserved for social gatherings and leisure activities, presenting a balanced and enviable lifestyle. With everything falling into place beautifully, Natalie and Pierre decided it was the perfect time to expand their family. They joyfully celebrated Natalie's first pregnancy, planning to fully immerse herself in motherhood. Natalie decided to take a career break post-delivery, confident in Pierre's ability to support their growing family financially. Despite the impending changes and added responsibilities, their home continued to exude warmth and charm, with Natalie ensuring it remained a cozy sanctuary, filled with the aroma of freshly baked treats and maintained with meticulous care throughout her pregnancy. The birth of their first daughter, Louise, marked a new chapter in their lives. From the outset, Louise was extraordinarily affectionate towards her parents. She was a serene baby whose cries were rare and mostly confined to the night. As she grew, Louise displayed signs of remarkable intelligence that left Natalie and Pierre in constant admiration. As school approached, they considered enrolling her in a prestigious private school known for fostering talented children. Pierre was particularly keen on nurturing his daughter's potential early. However, Natalie, always the voice of reason, cautioned, "Let's not rush things. She's still very young," ensuring a balanced approach to their daughter's upbringing. Louise's academic talents continued to flourish, and amidst these achievements, the family celebrated the joyous news of Natalie's second pregnancy. Louise, now 5, was overjoyed at the prospect of a new sibling. She often tenderly caressed her mother's belly, eagerly anticipating the arrival of her new brother or sister, a gesture that deeply moved Natalie. Even at such a young age, her affection and understanding hinted at her deep emotional intelligence and love for her family. From a young age, Louise exhibited a nurturing and protective nature, which Natalie cherished deeply. These moments were precious to Natalie, who was blissfully unaware of the significant changes that their family would soon face. During the arrival of their second child, Natalie found herself without her husband Pierre by her side. Pierre, who had intended to be there to support his wife in the maternity ward, was unexpectedly detained. In his stead, he asked his mother, Maureen, to care for Louise. The birth of their son, Julien, turned out to be considerably more challenging than Natalie's first delivery with Louise. Natalie had meticulously prepared for a natural childbirth, similar to her experience 5 years prior. She mentally prepared herself for the demanding process that lay ahead. However, after enduring several hours of intense labor, soaked in sweat and utterly fatigued, there was still no sign of Julian making his entrance. The medical team closely monitored Natalie's fading strength and her visible struggle to continue. Recognizing the seriousness of the situation, the attending doctor conducted immediate examinations and concluded that continuing with a natural birth was too perilous. This led to a rapid decision to alter their approach. Despite Natalie's firm belief in her ability to endure a natural birth based on her previous experience, an additional 30 minutes of labor demonstrated that she no longer had the stamina for a natural delivery. The situation became critical when the obstetrician noticed that Julian was in a position that made natural childbirth untenable, with time running out and Natalie's health at risk. The medical team decided to perform an emergency cesarean section. During these tense moments, Pierre, Natalie's husband, was consumed with worry. Although he supported the decision for a cesarean to mitigate Natalie's distress, the thought of the surgery and its inherent risks filled him with apprehension. Despite his severe phobia of blood, Pierre was determined to stay by Natalie's side, tightly holding her hand as the surgeons prepared for the procedure. However, as the operation commenced and the first incision was made, his phobia got the better of him, and he fainted, collapsing in the operating room. The surgery was a success. Natalie and their newborn son, Julian, were both in good health and in stable condition. When Pierre regained consciousness, he found himself next to Natalie, who was still under the effects of the anesthesia. Overwhelmed with relief and admiration, he watched over her, grateful for the well-being of his wife and their new son. The breastfeeding moment between Julian and his mother Natalie was deeply moving for both parents. As Julian nursed, Pierre leaned in close, his voice soft with emotion as he whispered to Natalie, "We've created another little miracle, my love," before gently kissing her forehead. Natalie, brimming with happiness and anticipation, eagerly looked forward to the moment when her daughter Louise would meet her new brother. "She's going to be the most amazing big sister," Natalie remarked with a loving gaze upon Julian. The day Natalie was to leave the hospital was filled with excitement. Louise, her excitement barely containable, was already waiting in the car alongside their grandmother, Maureen, both eager to welcome the newest member of the family. As the car pulled up and the back door swung open, Louise leapt out to greet her mother and catch her first glimpse of Julian. Maureen stepped up to assist Natalie, cradling Julian in her arms. As they prepared for the introduction, Pierre gently coaxed Louise. "This is your brother Julian. Come say hello." As Natalie carefully positioned herself to facilitate their first meeting, this introduction was meant to be a moment of joy and celebration. However, as the family gathered, the atmosphere took a surprising turn. When Louise laid eyes on Julian, her initial joyful expression shifted to one of confusion and disbelief. Instead of embracing him, she shook her head and firmly stated, "He's not my brother," plunging the gathering into stunned silence. The air thickened with confusion as everyone tried to grasp whether Louise was serious or simply joking. It was Maureen, the wise grandmother, who first broke the silence. She gently encouraged Louise to explain her startling declaration. But Louise remained silent, her expression a mix of doubt and curiosity. Despite Pierre's encouragement for her to take another look at Julien, Louise's initial reaction remained steadfast. As she approached Julien again, she pointed out his light hair and blue eyes, which were in stark contrast to the rest of the family's darker features. Her keen observational skills were evident, deepening the mystery. Louise's comments, though from a young child, hinted at a deeper need for an explanation. To alleviate her concerns, Natalie attempted to explain that the features of newborns can often change as they grow. Despite this, Louise remained unconvinced. Shaking her head in disbelief, she ran towards the house, leaving a trail of unanswered questions and a family grappling with her reaction. With concern, Natalie and Pierre continued their efforts to understand and address the complex emotions Louise was experiencing. The family, grappling to make sense of her startling reaction, sought guidance from various quarters, including a child psychologist who advised that such behavior, while concerning, could sometimes stem from deep-seated fears or insecurities that Louise herself might not fully understand. As Natalie and Pierre exchanged glances filled with concern and confusion over Louise's puzzling behavior towards their newborn son Julien, they pondered whether jealousy or fear of losing their attention could be the root causes. Amidst their worry, Maureen, the wise grandmother, stepped in with a comforting insight. She suggested that Louise's reaction might be typical for children adjusting to a new sibling and urged them not to be overly concerned. She recommended that they encourage Louise to participate in Julien's care and constantly reassure her of their unwavering love to help alleviate her fears. Get her involved. Show her she's an important part of this new chapter, and you'll notice a difference, Maureen advised, drawing from her rich experience with family dynamics. Despite Natalie and Pierre's earnest attempts to follow Maureen's advice, the weeks that followed did not seem to bring about any positive change in Louise's demeanor. She maintained her distance from Julien, occasionally making unsettling declarations that he was not her brother, leaving her parents at a loss about how to mend the growing rift between their children. Alarmed by Louise's continued stance, Natalie believed that further involving her in Julien's daily routines might foster a change in her feelings. She encouraged Louise to help with Julien's baths, hoping this would make her feel valued and connected, thereby dispelling her persistent denial of Julien as a family member. However, even as Louise participated, her emotional detachment persisted. She was silent and devoid of affection, a stark contrast to the girl who had initially been excited about the prospect of a younger brother. As 6 months passed, Natalie's and Pierre's varied strategies to cultivate a relationship between Louise and Julien seemed increasingly futile. The once cherished family dynamic was now marred by the emotional distance that had formed. They continued to search for ways to bridge this gap, hoping to restore harmony within their home. Louise exhibited a puzzling aloofness, showing little interest in engaging with her brother Julien, who was becoming increasingly aware of her detachment. As Julien sought more of his sister's attention, he was consistently met with a coldness that troubled Natalie and Pierre. The growing emotional rift between their children seemed too vast to bridge, deviating significantly from the close-knit family life they had envisioned. The challenge they faced extended beyond simply caring for Julien. It involved addressing the emotional chasm that had unexpectedly emerged between their daughter and son. a task that seemed daunting yet crucial for the well-being of their family. Amid the ongoing challenges, Pierre convinced Natalie to consult a child psychologist to address their daughter Louise's troubling behavior, suspecting it might be rooted in jealousy or other deep-seated emotional issues. With some hesitation, Natalie agreed, and they scheduled a session with Dr. Morgan White, a renowned expert in child psychology. Despite multiple therapy sessions, Louise consistently claimed that Julien was not her biological brother, a statement she couldn't logically justify. Recognizing Louise's typically logical mindset, Dr. White proposed an unconventional yet definitive approach, a DNA test to establish the biological relationship between Louise and Julien. Despite her youth, Louise understood the importance of the DNA test and its potential to resolve the uncertainties about their family connections. Dr. White was optimistic that concrete scientific evidence could dispel Louise's doubts. Initially, Natalie was hesitant about the DNA test, fearing it might suggest uncertainty about Julien's parentage. However, Pierre saw it as a practical measure to help Louise accept Julien and heal the family's strained relationships. With some reservations, Natalie consented, prioritizing the family's overall harmony. They proceeded with the DNA test, bearing the expense and collecting samples from all family members, anxiously awaiting the results that could confirm their daughter's suspicions or relieve them. During the waiting period, they celebrated Julien's growth and developmental achievements with mixed emotions. Although he had not yet started walking, he was sitting up and showing early signs of crawling. His laughter brought a unique joy to their home, resonating with the happiness that only a baby can bring. He also shared a special bond with his grandmother Maureen, delighting in her cuddles and reaching out with his little arms. His bright, curious eyes were a daily source of joy for Natalie and Pierre, reminding them of the love and light he brought into their lives. Caring for Julien was a mix of challenges and immense rewards for Natalie and Pierre. However, their happiness was overshadowed by the palpable tension in their home due to Louise's continued reluctance to connect with Julien, something that stood out especially because Louise was generally friendly with other neighborhood children. The atmosphere in the home shifted dramatically one Friday morning when the results of the DNA test arrived. Pierre, who first saw the report online, was overwhelmed by the findings. His immediate reaction caught Natalie's attention, marking a pivotal moment that would reshape their family dynamics. Natalie, with Julien cradled tenderly in her arms, approached Pierre to delve into the perplexing issue firsthand. As they carefully examined the document again and again, both were confounded by the cryptic words it contained. According to the report, Julien's DNA did not match that of either parent. This revelation plunged Pierre into a deep shock, stirring up painful doubts about Natalie's loyalty. Overwhelmed and desperate for answers, Pierre urgently contacted the doctor at the laboratory seeking further clarification. The shocking news was reconfirmed. Julien was not biologically related to either of them. Natalie's anguish was evident as she wrestled with the unsettling findings, her cries of confusion and despair reverberating around the room. "But how can this be? He was born to me," she sobbed, her voice laden with sorrow and her faith in her understanding of their family deeply shaken by this bewildering news. In search of some clarity, Pierre suggested that they redo the test, entertaining the possibility of a lab error. Initially, Natalie was too overwhelmed to consider this. But then she gathered her thoughts and asked Pierre about the exact moment Julien was handed to her after her delivery. Pierre admitted that he had missed that critical moment because he had fainted during the cesarean section. When he came to, Julien was already being presented to them as their son. This conversation sparked a grave realization for both Natalie and Pierre, the distressing possibility that there might have been a mix-up at the hospital. This terrifying thought lingered with them in the following days, casting a shadow over their relationship with the child they had lovingly cared for since his birth. Despite the DNA evidence suggesting Julien was not their biological son, they were caught in a tormenting predicament, conflicted between their love for him and the unsettling truth the test had unveiled. Faced with a heart-wrenching decision, Pierre and Natalie grappled with whether to investigate further, potentially disrupting the life of the son they adored, or to dismiss the DNA results and continue to love Julien as their own, disregarding the genetic discrepancies. This dilemma deeply affected Pierre, who found it hard to focus at work, and Natalie, whose interactions with Julien were now tinged with a sense of alienation. The outcome of the DNA test and the persistent doubts about Julien's true parentage cast a long shadow over their once joyful home, affecting even Maureen, who sensed the tension and uncertainty enveloping her family. Determined to uncover the truth, Natalie and Pierre contacted the hospital where their son Julien was born, prompting the facility to launch a comprehensive investigation. The hospital set out to identify any potential errors involving newborns during the time of Julien's birth. After an exhaustive 10-day investigation, they unearthed a likely scenario involving a young couple who had recently faced grave difficulties. This couple, displaced by a natural disaster and forced to live with relatives, was now at the heart of a complex and emotionally charged inquiry. Natalie and Pierre were already under considerable financial strain as their son, born with severe health complications, required urgent and extensive medical intervention. This financial pressure was stretching their resources to the limit. The hospital staff then delivered heart-wrenching news that exacerbated their ordeal. Due to a serious mistake in the maternity ward, the child Natalie had been caring for was not biologically hers. This revelation struck Natalie with the force of a tidal wave, unleashing a flood of emotions as she faced the reality of raising a child she had not given birth to. This grievous error had intertwined the destinies of two families, plunging them into a deeply emotional and unexpected situation. Both sets of parents were forced to navigate a complex labyrinth of emotions and make difficult decisions about their futures. Upon discovering the truth, Natalie and Pierre were overwhelmed by a mix of disbelief and sorrow. They had formed a profound attachment to the baby boy they believed was their own, and the prospect of parting with him was almost unbearable. Meanwhile, their interactions with Julien, the boy they had come to love deeply, were now tainted by the knowledge that he was not their biological son. In a decision fraught with emotion and guided by a sense of ethical duty, both families agreed to exchange the babies they had grown to love as their own. This resolution marked a deeply painful chapter in their lives, as it required them to part with the children they had nurtured and cherished from birth. During the exchange, a whirlwind of emotions engulfed the parents as they held their biological children for the first time. They experienced a strange mix of alienation and budding affection. These babies, while genetically related, were strangers to them, yet they also represented an essential part of their identity. The transition was fraught with challenges as both families grappled with their new reality, striving to forge bonds with their biological children while mourning the loss of the ones they had mistakenly come to love. Each family diligently worked to establish connections with their biological children, grappling with the mixed emotions of letting go of one child while welcoming another. They endeavored to develop meaningful relationships with their biological offspring, all the while holding dear the memories and bonds formed with the children they had initially thought were their own. As this emotionally charged chapter drew to a close and a new one began, the families exited the hospital. During the drive home, Pierre was lost in thought, driving in a contemplative silence. Beside him, Natalie gently cradled their biological son, thoughtfully considering the time it might take for the child to recognize her as his mother and for her to rekindle the deep maternal bond she had previously felt with Julien. Pierre was troubled by the memory of Louise's instinctual feeling that Julien was not her biological brother, a perplexing mystery that lingered in their extraordinary tale. Back at home, Louise awaited their return, her calm demeanor possibly hinting at an intuitive anticipation of the impending familial shift. When Natalie and Pierre entered the living room with the baby, Louise's curiosity was palpable. As Natalie knelt down with the infant to allow Louise a closer look, the baby reached out his hand, and a warm, recognizing smile brightened Louise's face. "Is this my brother?" she inquired, her voice capturing the complex weave of emotions and new beginnings of that day. "Hold him," she urged, her voice imbued with a newfound assurance that touched everyone in the room. This moment signaled the onset of healing and hope as the family observed the emerging connection between Louise and the baby boy, Julien. Julien quickly settled into his new environment, and it wasn't long before Natalie and Pierre felt a profound affection for him, paralleled by the joyful interactions between Louise and her new brother. Louise played a pivotal role in helping her brother acclimate, sharing moments of laughter and discovery. The boy eventually underwent a successful surgery to address his medical conditions, further strengthening the family's bond. As the siblings grew, their relationship flourished, evolving into a robust and supportive friendship. The enigma of Louise's initial intuition about Julien not being her brother remains a fascinating family story, an enigma she cannot unravel as she matures. However, Maureen often reflects on the event, positing that Louise's innate sense may have played a crucial role in uncovering the hospital mix-up, guiding both families towards their true connections. Children's instincts can be remarkably profound. What are your thoughts on this phenomenon? Is it a case of primal intuition overriding logic, or simply a coincidence? What do you think? Please feel free to share your thoughts and engage in discussions in the comment section below. And then we will bring you in another touching story. Let's continue. As Karen grappled with these thoughts, the reality of her circumstances began to weigh heavily on her. In a whirlwind of emotions and urgency, Frank had driven Karen to the hospital as she started experiencing severe labor pains, indicative of their baby's imminent arrival. After enduring a grueling 48-hour labor, Karen gave birth. However, the mood in the delivery room took a sudden, tense turn. The attending doctor, who initially appeared shocked at the sight of the newborns, struggled to maintain his composure, his face ashen with disbelief. Karen was softly told that additional tests were necessary to confirm the well-being of her newborn triplets, who were immediately whisked away for further medical evaluation. When the doctor returned to update the increasingly worried parents, his demeanor had changed significantly. His face was flushed with embarrassment, and he seemed unable to make eye contact with either Karen or Frank. This unusual behavior raised alarms, as it was out of character for the typically steady physician. He stuttered through his apologies and emphasized the need for further tests. Amid the escalating tension and overwhelmed by concern, Karen vehemently demanded to see her babies. Despite her entreaties, the doctor firmly refused, citing potential health risks that could jeopardize the triplets' safety before conclusive results were obtained. Frank, equally distressed, staunchly insisted on seeing his children and, in a moment of desperation, attempted to access the hospital's restricted research area. Caught off guard, the doctor hastily summoned security to prevent Frank from proceeding. Though Frank did not resist, realizing that any escalation could further complicate an already delicate situation, Karen was subsequently escorted to a separate room for extensive questioning, and Frank was sent home. The medical team pressed Karen with a barrage of inquiries about her pregnancy, some of which she initially evaded, her mind consumed with worry for her triplets. The nurse stressed the necessity of her full cooperation to safeguard the infant's health. It was then that Karen truly understood the seriousness of the situation. During this intense questioning, a startling inquiry was posed. "Are you certain Frank is the father?" This question left Karen both stunned and wounded. Despite feeling cornered by the implications and the intense scrutiny, Karen had no doubts about Frank's paternity. The nurse hinted that there might be critical details Karen was omitting. Under the immense strain of both the complex birth and the probing questions, Karen broke down in tears. She was deeply disturbed by the multitude of events that had unfolded both in the lead-up to and during her pregnancy, and the prospect of revealing these personal hardships felt overwhelming. As Karen navigated this tumultuous ordeal, the intertwining of her actions and the unforeseen complications of her pregnancy painted a complex picture, one that would require her to confront and untangle the threads of truth that bound her family's fate, intensified by her maternal instincts and the mysterious circumstances surrounding her pregnancy and the hospital's actions. During this vulnerable period, Karen feared that she might have inadvertently exposed her newborns to risks. The burden of this possibility weighed heavily on her, intensifying her distress as she navigated through this delicate and crucial situation. The potential danger to her children prompted the nurse to advise Karen to keep her concerns confidential, reassuring her that their conversations would remain private. Encouraged by this assurance of discretion, Karen began to share more about her past, recounting stories from her childhood and her life after marrying Frank. They were overjoyed when they found out she was pregnant. Unfortunately, her pregnancy was overshadowed by severe, unexplained abdominal pain. Despite her discomfort, the doctors repeatedly reassured her that such symptoms were common during pregnancy. However, Karen couldn't shake the feeling that perhaps the doctors were overlooking something vital. The nurse, while reviewing past test results from various doctors, noticed several inconsistencies. It seemed as though there was a concerted effort to obscure certain information. Unraveling this mystery became crucial. To this day, Karen has yet to fully grasp the severity of her situation. The nurse had contacted the doctor to discuss his recent lab findings. Ironically, the doctor who had initially conducted the tests had been dismissed 2 weeks earlier. Despite the doctor's assurances that Karen and her triplets were doing well, there was a lingering necessity for Karen to assess whether they could flourish without constant medical supervision. The doctor had advised Karen to stay overnight in the hospital for further observation. Determined not to accept her situation passively, Karen suspected that working closely with the doctor could bring benefits for both her and her unborn children. Additionally, Karen had devised a covert plan for that night, indicating that she would not confine herself to her room. Driven by a compulsion to act, Karen left her bed during the nurse's last visit, determined to discover what was happening with her children. Her investigation led her to attempt to access the nursery on an upper floor of the hospital. As she neared her destination, adrenaline surged through her body. However, Karen proceeded with caution, aware that security patrolled the area. Since she was not an employee, she couldn't pose as hospital staff. Upon reaching the nursery, she encountered a new challenge. The door was locked, and she lacked the necessary keycard for entry. She had a notion about where she might obtain one, but she knew that pursuing this during her postpartum recovery was fraught with risks. Determined to uncover the truth about her children's situation, Karen's resolve was unyielding. Driven by her deep maternal instincts and the mysterious circumstances she faced. Despite the complex maze of hospital protocols and security measures, Karen's resolve remained unshaken. Standing before the securely locked door, her determination intensified. Fueled by the primal instinct of a mother to safeguard her newborns, Karen had been suspicious that there were additional keycards. Not just the one issued by the hospital's security office. With a strategic plan in place, she skillfully synchronized her actions to coincide with the security patrols, managing to discreetly secure an extra keycard. Her primary focus was always the safety and well-being of her infants. Once she had the keycard in her possession, Karen quickly made her way back to the nursery. She used the card to unlock the door and, upon entering, a sigh of relief escaped her lips even as her heart raced with urgency. It had been a while since she had last seen her children, and the anxiety of not knowing their current state was overwhelming. The names on the devices in the nursery provided a moment of comfort. Yet her relief turned to dread when she realized her infants were not there. Out of the corner of her eye, Karen noticed an unusual piece of equipment. Drawn to it, she approached the window and knelt down. It was then that she spotted her children. Overwhelmed by emotion, she began to cry loudly, her sobs echoing along the corridor. At this point, she was indifferent to the possibility of being overheard. Her emotions surged uncontrollably, unable to bear the stress and fear any longer. As she was outside the apartment with her 3 children, medical staff including a doctor and several nurses hurried towards her. They had previously insisted that Karen should not contact her children until more information was available. And now they braced for the worst. Karen was taken aback when the nurses joined her on the ground, sharing the doctor's concerns. The good news was that her children were alive, but the staff struggled to explain the unusual features her children exhibited, which only increased Karen's frustration and anger. The doctor mentioned that test results were expected the next day and advised Karen to try and rest in the meantime. However, Karen was not receptive to these suggestions and became visibly agitated. In response, the doctor recommended that she take something to help her sleep, even suggesting sedation for her own safety. Karen vehemently refused all attempts to medicate her. Only did the DNA confirm Frank as the father, but it also revealed an extraordinary genetic anomaly that could potentially explain the unusual medical conditions of the newborns. This discovery suggested that the triplets might be suffering from a rare genetic disorder. which could have been contributing to their poor health since birth. Overwhelmed by this revelation, Karen and Frank were immediately swamped with a mix of relief and alarm. The possibility that their children could be dealing with a hereditary issue was daunting. Yet the clarity provided by the DNA results offered a direction for further medical investigation. The doctor, now more empathetic than before, detailed the next steps for the triplets' care. He proposed a comprehensive plan that involved genetic specialists and continuous monitoring to better understand and manage the infant's condition. Karen, although distressed, felt a renewed sense of hope that, with targeted medical attention, her children might have a fighting chance. Frank, reassured by his confirmed paternity and struck by the gravity of the situation, softened his demeanor and apologized to Karen for his earlier outburst. United by their concern for their children, the couple vowed to face whatever challenges lay ahead together. As the hospital staff mobilized to provide the necessary care, Karen and Frank braced themselves for a journey filled with medical consultations and uncertainty, but also a deeper bond forged through their shared ordeal and commitment to their family's well-being. A trace of Karen's DNA was detected in the newborn's genetic material, a discovery that left both Karen and the attending physician perplexed. The doctor, momentarily speechless, quickly composed himself and assured Karen that they would work diligently to solve the mystery surrounding this unexpected result. Compelled by a strong desire to be close to her children, Karen asked to visit the neonatal unit. The doctor, understanding her urgency, agreed to accompany Karen and her husband Frank to the maternity ward where their babies were being cared for. Upon their arrival and seeing his children for the first time, Frank experienced a complex mix of emotions. His reaction marked by confusion, which contrasted sharply with Karen's immediate, heartfelt bond with the newborns. Amidst their swirling emotions, the doctor told them that an expanded team of specialists was now involved, dedicating extra hours in the laboratory to investigate the peculiar DNA characteristics of the infants. He emphasized their dedication to resolving the issue, though he acknowledged the complexity and unpredictability of the path ahead. In such cases, it is not typical for physicians to perform invasive tests on newborns. Rather, they opt for a gentle approach, delicately sampling the baby's skin to avoid causing any discomfort. The doctors estimated that their analysis would take a few hours, but they were confident in obtaining a definitive result. During this tense period, Karen's emotions started to spiral, and she abruptly voiced a fear that their babies had been mistakenly switched at birth. In her panic, she began frantically searching the unit for her biological children, while Frank believed Karen was reacting excessively. The doctor initially tried to mediate the situation to prevent her from jumping to conclusions. However, he soon gave her space to independently process her thoughts. Karen, entrenched in denial, became convinced that the child they had taken home was not hers, leading her to disengage and show a lack of interest in bonding with the infant. Both Frank and the doctor observed Karen's display of frustration and anger, giving her time to vent her emotions. Eventually, overwhelmed by the situation, Karen collapsed on the hospital floor in defeat. Frank led her to calm down, and the doctor reassured them about the health of their infant, explaining that the analysis was taking longer than initially anticipated but that results should be available by the next day. That evening, Frank and Karen discussed their situation extensively, understanding that clarity would come with the next day's findings. The wait was agonizing, and they spent the following morning anxiously waiting by the phone, attempting to reach the busy doctor. Finally, the phone call they had been eagerly awaiting came. With a tense atmosphere enveloping them, Karen answered the phone, putting the doctor on speaker. Frank and Karen swiftly made their way to the hospital after receiving a call from the doctor who announced having a crucial update they preferred to discuss in person. Throughout the drive, Karen was overcome with anxiety, her nerves frayed with the fear of potentially devastating news, leading her to sit in tense silence, unable to engage in any conversation with Frank. The minutes stretched endlessly before they finally reached the hospital. Upon their arrival, they were greeted by the doctor and promptly led into a serene, private room designed to provide comfort during sensitive conversations. A nurse gently brought in their triplet babies, easing some of the tension in the room. The doctor welcomed them warmly, inviting them to sit before sharing the much-anticipated news. He began by explaining the reason behind the infant's notably small size. Karen's uterus had been exceptionally cramped, a condition that restricted the baby's growth during development. However, he reassured the anxious parents that this was a temporary setback. The doctor confidently affirmed that with time and proper care, the triplets would catch up in growth and eventually develop into healthy, normal-sized children. The wave of relief that washed over Karen and Frank was palpable. They exchanged relieved glances, their earlier fears dissolving away. The doctor also reflected on the situation, noting that an initial DNA test could have spared the couple much worry. Such a test would have confirmed the parentage of the babies right away, avoiding unnecessary confusion and stress. This piece of advice underscored the importance of thorough medical investigations and left Frank and Karen contemplating the value of proactive healthcare measures. That's today's story. After listening to the above two stories, do you have any thoughts? You can tell us in the comment area. If you like them, please subscribe and like them. See you next time.